Have you ever noticed how some silences are louder than noise? Because in my town, the loudest thing I've ever heard is a clock that hasn't rung in over 40 years. It stands at the center of Willow Creek, taller than anything else for miles, brick darkened by time, windows like empty eye sockets, a clock face frozen at 2:17. And no matter how lost you are, no matter which road you take, you always end up seeing it. The old clock tower. People will tell you it's just an abandoned structure, a relic from a different era, a maintenance nightmare the town couldn't afford. That's what they say. What they don't say is why every kid here knows the same rule without ever being taught. Don't go near the tower. Don't ask about the tower. And whatever you do, don't go inside. Because something happened there. Something so final, so deeply buried that an entire town agreed, without a meeting, without a vote, to pretend it never did. And the terrifying part? It worked. For decades. I didn't start this story looking for answers. I started it because I couldn't sleep. Because even after leaving Willow Creek, even after building a life somewhere else, I'd still dream about that tower. Not falling apart, not collapsing, just waiting. When I was a kid, the clock tower didn't scare me. It confused me. Every town has a heart, a place where things gather, where stories start. Ours was dead. No festivals, no plaques, no flowers, just a locked iron door and a fence that appeared overnight one summer without explanation. If you asked your parents why, they'd change the subject. If you asked your teachers, they'd say it wasn't safe. If you asked the police, they'd tell you it was private property, which made no sense because it belonged to the town, or at least it used to. The older I got, the more the silence felt intentional, like everyone was guarding something fragile or guilty. Then one night, years later, I came back, not for nostalgia, for proof, because I found something I was never supposed to see. A name, written in the margin of an old library ledger that hadn't been checked out since 1989. A child's name, a date, and 3 words scribbled in red pencil that made my hands start shaking. Last seen, tower. If the clock tower was just an abandoned building, why was a missing child tied to it, and why had no one ever talked about it? That's when I realized something horrifying. This wasn't just a forgotten tragedy. It was a decision, a choice made by people with power. And the tower? The tower wasn't abandoned. It was sealed, like a grave no one wanted to mark. So let me ask you something. What kind of town lets a child disappear and then builds its life around pretending it never happened? Because Willow Creek did, and the clock has been keeping time ever since. Just not for us. Growing up in Willow Creek felt safe. That's what everyone says about small towns. Tree-lined streets, Friday night lights, doors that didn't need locks. But safety isn't always real. Sometimes it's just enforced silence. I was 7 when I first learned the rule. We were playing tag near Main Street, running until our lungs burned, laughing the kind of laugh only kids can manage. Then someone tagged me too hard. I tripped, skinned my knee. And when I looked up, I saw the tower. Up close. Closer than I'd ever been allowed. I remembered the shadow first. It didn't move like other shadows. It swallowed the light. And before I could even stand, my friend Tyler grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. "No," he whispered. Not shouted, not laughed, whispered, like it could hear us. That was the day I learned fear doesn't always come with screams. Sometimes it comes with rules. Rules like, don't ride your bike past Elm Street, don't play hide and seek near downtown, and never, ever use the tower as a hiding spot. Nobody explained why. They never had to. The adults would stiffen when the tower appeared in conversation. A cough, a glance away, a sudden need to be somewhere else. Once I asked my father why the clock never rang. He stared at the TV like I hadn't spoken. Then he said something I'll never forget. Some things stop on purpose. I didn't understand it then. I do now, because stopping time is easier than facing it. As we grew older, the stories started. Not the real ones, the safe ones. Teenagers said the tower was haunted, that animals refused to go near it, that if you listened closely at night, you could hear footsteps on the stairs. But no one ever said whose footsteps. No one ever said when. And no one ever said why the police station had a sealed basement room labeled Municipal Records Restricted. That label mattered, because when I came back as an adult, after years away, that door was still there, still locked, still guarded, and still missing something critical. Any mention of a child going missing in Willow Creek. Officially, it never happened. No Amber Alerts, no vigils, no anniversary articles. Yet every old-timer I spoke to remembered the year the chime stopped. They remembered the sudden fence, they remembered the wealthy family who donated new patrol cars to the police department that same summer, and they remembered a boy who loved games, especially hide and seek. Here's what chills me the most. Hide and seek is about trust. You close your eyes, you count, you believe the others will come back. But what if one didn't? What if the hiding place wasn't found because no one wanted it to be? When I started digging, people stopped returning my calls. One man warned me quietly at a gas station to let the past stay buried. Another asked me why I'd risk waking it up. He didn't explain what it was. He didn't have to, because that night, as I stood across the street from the tower for the first time in decades, I noticed something new. The lock on the door was gone, and the iron gate, it was open, just wide enough. Like the tower had finally decided it was time.
Have you ever wondered why a place can feel alive even when no one walks its halls? Because the clock tower does. And it has been doing it long before anyone in Willow Creek was born. They say it was built in 1892, a gift to the town from the Winslow family, a symbol of progress, a marker of pride. And it was beautiful. Brick and mortar stacked with care, timbers creaking in rhythm with the winds that raced across Main Street, glass glinting when the sun hit just right. For decades, its bells rang on the hour, every hour, and every hour the town listened, marking their days by its chimes, guiding their work, their school, their lives. Then, one summer in the mid-1970s, the chimes stopped. Nobody could explain it, not the locksmith who had tended the clock, not the town council, not even the Winslow family themselves. Rumors began, early whispers, odd contradictions. Some said a child had died in the bell shaft. Others said the family had a scandal they wanted hidden. One local swore the clock's hands were stopped by someone from inside. Another insisted the sound of the chimes could no longer be heard because the wind itself had changed. It didn't matter. No one rang the bell again. No one fixed it. And yet, every year, someone new would move into Willow Creek, and every time the clock struck what should have been noon, they'd pause. Not because of a sound, because of the silence. The silence had weight, shape, presence. And that's when the contradictions began to matter. Because while the tower loomed large in the skyline, the town slowly began erasing it from daily life. School field trips avoided it, tourist maps didn't mark it, even the mayor stopped talking about it. Something didn't want the tower remembered, and maybe, just maybe, the tower remembered everyone.
No one talks about it openly, but the story you will hear from those old enough to remember is terrifying. The summer the chime stopped was also the summer Tommy Winslow vanished. Tommy, 8 years old, bright-eyed, reckless, fearless. A child who loved hide and seek more than anything. It was July 15th, 1976. The sun was hot enough to make the pavement shimmer. Kids laughed in the streets. Parents leaned on porches, keeping an eye but pretending they weren't. Everything felt ordinary. Until it wasn't. Tommy chose the clock tower as his hiding place.
He ran faster than the others, slipped past fences, slid through narrow gaps no one thought a kid could fit. And then he disappeared. The first few hours, no one thought it was serious. Playing hide and seek, they said. He'll turn up. But as the sun set, fear began to creep in. Police were called. Neighbors searched. Dogs barked. Voices echoed across empty streets. But the tower stayed silent, empty, impenetrable. And then, the first contradictions. Reports were filed, but they were incomplete, crucial pages missing, statements oddly similar. Witnesses remembered details differently, but the variations were strange, too controlled. No one knew who had last seen him climb inside. No one knew if the gate was locked. No one could say if they'd called the Winslows immediately. The only certainty? Tommy never came back. The town grieved in private. Fences went up overnight. Stories changed. And the clock stopped. For decades, the official records read as if nothing extraordinary had happened. A simple child missing, presumed runaway entry. No panic, no controversy, just silence. And yet, everyone knew. Everyone in Willow Creek remembered the summer the clock stopped. The Winslows refused interviews. The police didn't pursue leads. The newspapers ran brief notices and moved on. But children whispered. Parents warned quietly. And the tower became untouchable. I remember asking my grandmother about it. She paused mid-stirring a pot of soup, her hands frozen over the wooden spoon. "Don't speak of it," she said. And for a long moment, I understood. Some things are too dangerous to name. What really happened to Tommy? Why did everyone act as if he had simply vanished into thin air? And why, after decades, does the tower still seem to pulse with the memory of that day? That's the question that pulled me back to Willow Creek, because I wasn't going to ignore it. Not this time, not ever.
What if I told you that the truth had been sitting in a filing cabinet for decades, quietly mocking everyone who refused to look? That's exactly what I found. I spent nights in the town library, in the dusty archive room that smelled of mildew and old paper. Rows upon rows of folders, some yellowed, some barely holding together. Every one of them labeled with dates, names, official stamps. At first glance, they looked innocuous, ordinary. Reports of town meetings, building permits, animal complaints. But then, the first folder jumped out. Simple typed letters stamped confidential. The first words made me stop. Regarding the disappearance of Thomas Winslow. I froze. The name was different. Tommy in the stories, but official Thomas. Inside, the pages were sparse, but the omissions were loud. Handwritten notes in the margins, barely legible, hinted at meetings where certain witnesses were removed from questioning. Other entries mentioned the family's influence and do not disturb certain records. Even the tone of the official documents suggested restraint, a purposeful limiting of information. The police reports were worse. At first, they looked routine. Missing child, last seen at the clock tower, investigate. But as I read line after line, I noticed strange repetitions. The tower was locked at the time. The child had a tendency to wander. The witness statements were inconsistent. Inconsistent? That's putting it lightly. Some witnesses claimed they saw a man in the tower. Others said there was nobody there. Some swore they heard the bells ring after sunset. Others swore the chimes never rang again. Then came the journals. I couldn't believe my eyes. One was a leather-bound notebook, almost falling apart. The handwriting was hurried but careful. Entries started months before Tommy disappeared. The author, anonymous, wrote about strange activity around the clock tower. Lights moving in the windows at odd hours, footsteps when no one was there, a low hum, a vibration underfoot. One entry made my blood run cold. The Winslows know. They always know, and yet no one listens. Not the council, not the police. No one dares speak. I am watching, and I am writing, because if I do not, who will? Who was this person? How had they survived long enough to write all this down? The next journal belonged to an older officer, retired now. The handwriting was neat, clinical, but the words were damning. He mentioned being told to remove certain evidence. Certain statements from neighbors vanished without explanation. Photographs of the tower's interior, taken the day Tommy vanished, gone. I traced every name, every date, and every single path led back to one family, the Winslows. The more I read, the more it became clear that Tommy's disappearance wasn't just an accident. It was a pivot point, a day that changed the town forever, a day that no one in Willow Creek could ever speak of without fear. And yet, every line, every scribble screamed the truth at me.
The Winslows weren't just wealthy. They were untouchable. Generations of control over banks, town councils, local businesses. A family whose name alone silenced gossip and suspicion. When I started asking questions, I felt it immediately. The air changed. Neighbors who once smiled became cold. Old friends of my family avoided me, and every mention of Tommy Winslow, the child who never returned, was met with discomfort, deflection, or outright refusal to talk. I discovered something chilling. The Winslows had ways to enforce silence. Checks made to local newspapers with instructions on tone adjustments, letters threatening lawsuits against anyone who questioned the events of that fateful summer. Even whispers of physical intimidation, but nothing recorded, nothing official. I found a letter in the archives, typewritten, with the Winslow family seal at the top. It is imperative that the records remain unchanged. Any deviation will result in immediate and serious consequences. Respect the family and respect the town. Do not speak. That wasn't just influence, that was fear. And fear was exactly what kept Willow Creek quiet for decades. I reached out to old-timers, people who had been children the year Tommy disappeared. Many didn't remember. Some refused to speak. But a few whispered things that made my skin crawl. One man, now in his 70s, leaned in close in the local diner, his voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. "I saw something that day," he said. He swallowed hard. "Something you're not supposed to know." "What?" I asked. He shook his head. "They told me never speak, never write, never breathe a word. But the tower, it's not just a building. It watches, it remembers, and it feeds." I wanted to laugh, but I didn't, because even saying those words out loud sent a chill down my spine. I visited the old police captain, long retired, who had been one of the first officers on the scene. He invited me into a cluttered home, walls lined with dusty books and newspapers. He poured a glass of whiskey and sat in silence for a moment. "I've carried this for too long," he said. Then, slowly, he pulled out a folder. Inside, names, dates, addresses, all connected to Tommy's disappearance, all connected to the Winslows, and all stamped with a heavy hand, confidential. He whispered, "You have to understand, it wasn't just the family. It was the system, the town. Everyone knew, but no one spoke. And the clock kept ticking while we buried the truth." He paused, and then, almost as if reading my thoughts, "You want the truth? You want to know what really happened? You won't like it. You'll feel it in your bones." And he was right, because the more I dug, the more I realized something the journals hinted at but never fully spelled out. Tommy's disappearance had been orchestrated, a plan executed with precision, with influence, with decades of planning. And the clock tower, it wasn't just a backdrop, it was central to it. I found old blueprints, forgotten in the town archives, showing hidden chambers, narrow crawl spaces, secret access points. I traced the routes, the stairways, the bell shaft, and every line, every measurement suggested this wasn't a simple accident. It was a trap. The Winslows knew it.
They had used the town's fear, the town's obedience, and the tower's own secrets to erase a child from existence. And yet, every time I walked past that silent, looming brick structure, I could feel the pulse of history, a rhythm like a heartbeat, a low thrum beneath the wooden timbers. The tower was alive, and it knew. By the time I left that day, I understood one thing clearly. The story of Tommy Winslow wasn't just about a missing child. It was about power, influence, fear, and the way a single family could control a town's memory. Every witness I spoke to, every document I touched, whispered the same truth. The Winslows were untouchable. The town was complicit, and the clock tower held the final piece of the puzzle, a puzzle no one dared solve. And that's when I realized I couldn't stop now, because if I did, I'd never hear the end of the story, and the tower would not forgive. The deeper I went, the more dangerous it became. Some people were watching me. Some letters arrived, unsigned. A car followed me home one night, headlights disappearing before I could get a plate, and a shadow moved in the tower windows when the town was supposed to be asleep. It wasn't imagination. It was a warning. And the truth was only just beginning to emerge.
Have you ever walked into a room and felt it watching you back? That's exactly how it felt the first time I returned to the town hall archives. The air was thick with dust, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing above, and an oppressive silence pressing down on me. It wasn't just the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of decades-long secrets. Every creak in the floorboards echoed like a warning. Every shadow cast by the flickering light seemed deliberate. I spread out all the materials I had gathered, the journals, the police reports, the blueprints, and those cryptic handwritten letters from unknown town insiders. It was a jigsaw puzzle built from decades of lies, and each piece I uncovered revealed not clarity, but more questions. I started with the witnesses who had supposedly seen Tommy on the day he vanished. Some had moved away, some had died, and those who remained, they were silent. Suddenly, when approached, their eyes would dart away, their words clipped, their bodies stiff. Some even warned me, thinly veiled threats layered under nervous smiles. I pressed further. I asked old neighbors about the Winslows. I dug into real estate records, bank transfers, town council minutes. Everything pointed to a pattern of influence. Sudden changes in building permits, missing reports, mysterious resignations. Every action by the Winslows seemed small, trivial at first glance, until you stacked them together. And that's when I noticed the contradictions. Local newspaper clippings from the time of Tommy's disappearance reported conflicting details. Some articles described the tower deserted. Others suggested lights in the windows, shadows moving at odd hours. Official press statements downplayed the story entirely, claiming it was a routine missing child case. And yet, a series of letters to the editor, never published, spoke of a sinister presence and the tower remembers everything. I realized the story had been fractured intentionally. Different versions fed to different people to ensure confusion, and confusion is power. The Winslows thrived in it. Then came the truly disturbing part. Some witnesses I tracked down had vanished. Not quietly, not naturally, vanished. One woman, elderly now, had agreed to meet me at a local cafe. She had promised answers. I arrived early, heart racing, and when she didn't show, I called her, disconnected. The next day, her house was empty, belongings gone, no forwarding address. It wasn't coincidence, and every hair on the back of my neck screamed that the clock tower was at the center of all of it. I needed proof, something tangible, something that could survive the Winslows' influence. That's when I found the note taped to a filing cabinet drawer, hidden behind an old ledger. It read simply, "Leave the tower alone. Some doors are meant to remain closed." It was typed, official-looking, but it was personal, directed at me, a warning. I couldn't ignore it. The clock tower loomed in the center of town, silent but monumental, its red bricks almost glowing in the evening light.
I approached cautiously, scanning the surrounding streets. No one watched openly, but the feeling of eyes was impossible to shake. I pulled out my flashlight and examined the perimeter. Everything was as it had always been, and yet completely different. The wooden doors had marks of wear, but scratches that didn't match normal use. The windows were dusty, but one in particular reflected a strange low hum in the glass. I placed my hand on the frame. It vibrated faintly. A pulse, a heartbeat. I didn't stay long, but that night the clock tower haunted my dreams, not as a building, not as brick and wood, but as something alive, watching, waiting.
The next morning, I woke to something I had feared. My apartment had been searched. Files moved, journals shifted, a window left cracked. Not enough to be obvious, but obvious enough to send a shiver down my spine. Someone had been in my space while I slept, and they had left a message. A single line of text, written on a torn piece of notebook paper taped to my desk. Some doors should never be opened. You have gone too far. I knew then, the Winslows weren't just a family anymore. They were a network of influence, and now I was in their path. I started noticing cars following me, strangers lingering too long in the grocery store. Even neighbors, the ones who had smiled politely, now stared with subtle hostility. I began receiving calls with no one on the line. Heavy breathing, silence, a single faint click. I considered backing off, walking away. But the clock tower, the journals, the missing child, the town itself demanded that I continued. The investigation escalated. I returned to the archives late at night, flashlight cutting through the blackness, heart pounding. Each folder I opened revealed more contradictions, more lies. I pieced together a timeline of events that made no sense on the surface. Children disappearing, witnesses intimidated, records disappearing, blueprints altered. And then I discovered something truly unsettling. A map, hand-drawn, unsigned, tucked inside a police report. It showed hidden compartments within the clock tower, secret stairwells, crawl spaces, small chambers, and one location was marked with a simple X. Next to it, a single word, remember. I knew then, Tommy's disappearance and all the layers of deception was centered there. The tower held answers, and those answers would change everything I thought I knew about Willow Creek. But the deeper I dug, the more I felt the danger close in. A neighbor, elderly, warned me, you don't know what's inside. You don't know what's waiting. I tried to push past it, but that night a shadow moved across my window. No sound, no explanation, just a shape, watching, patient, and I knew it wasn't alone. Every instinct screamed, stop, but I couldn't, because the clock tower wasn't just history. It wasn't just a building. It was the keeper of decades of secrets, and it had noticed me. The walls seemed to whisper, a low creak in the distance, almost like a voice. The air thickened, the hairs on my arms stood up, and in the dark I understood something clearly. The truth was close, so close it hurt. But the closer I got, the more dangerous it became. And the Winslows, the town, the silence, they would do anything to stop me from learning it. Because the tower remembers, and it waits, and I had just taken the first real step inside its shadow.
What if I told you that stepping into a building could feel like stepping into someone else's mind? That's exactly how it felt the night I returned to the clock tower. The streets of Willow Creek were silent, empty, but for the hum of distant power lines. The tower itself loomed above me, shadowed and massive, its brick facade catching the dim moonlight. I could hear nothing, yet it was louder than anything I'd ever experienced. The air vibrated, thick with history, and a low, almost imperceptible hum seemed to emanate from the very walls. I approached cautiously, flashlight in hand, camera slung over my shoulder. Every instinct told me to turn back. But I couldn't. I had come too far. The front doors groaned as I pushed them open, hinges resisting decades of neglect. The smell hit me first. Dust, mildew, and something faintly metallic. Then the silence.
a silence so oppressive that it felt alive, as if the tower itself was breathing. I stepped inside. The interior was cloaked in shadows. Beams of moonlight slanted through cracked windows, dust motes swirling like tiny ghosts. The staircase to the upper floors loomed ahead, rickety, wooden, and groaning with every step I took. I placed my hand on the railing. It vibrated faintly like a pulse, and I shivered. I remembered the map I had found in the archives, the one with the hidden compartments. My flashlight swept across the walls, following the patterns I had memorized. Then I saw it, a faint outline of a door, almost invisible in the dust and decay. A hidden panel, exactly where the map had indicated. I knelt to examine it. The wood was worn, scratched, but the handle was intact. I hesitated, hand hovering over it. Every story I had uncovered, every warning, every vanished witness, all led to this moment. I pulled the handle. The door gave way with a sound like a sigh, revealing a narrow passage. I stepped inside. The air was cooler here, damper, and smelled faintly of rust and old paper. I could hear my own heartbeat loud in my ears. Every step felt heavier than the last. The passage was narrow, forcing me to move sideways, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. And then I heard it. A whisper, soft, indistinct, almost a voice carried by the ventilation or the shadows. I froze. The whisper repeated, "You shouldn't be here." I swallowed, forcing myself to move forward. The passage opened into a small chamber, and there, scattered on the floor, were remnants of what I had only seen in the journals: old toys, a torn piece of a child's sweater, pages from a notebook yellowed with age. It was Tommy's. The room was small, square, almost impossibly tight. Walls lined with peeling paint and graffiti from previous intruders, perhaps children who had dared come here before me. And in the center, an old wooden chest, heavy, locked. I examined it carefully. No keyhole, no obvious way to open it, just this strange carved symbol on the lid. My flashlight flickered. I felt the temperature drop. The pulse I had felt in the walls earlier intensified. It was as if the tower itself was warning me, as if the chest was alive. I opened my notebook to compare sketches. The journals had described this room vaguely, hints, cryptic notes, but never explicit instructions. Every historian, every reporter, every witness who had dared approach this tower had been blocked, silenced, or disappeared. And now, here I was. I took a deep breath. I was about to confront decades of fear, power, and silence. The chest held answers, but I had no idea how dangerous those answers could be.
The chest creaked as I forced it open. Inside were stacks of journals, neatly organized, despite the decay around them. I flipped one open. Handwriting, delicate, almost childlike, yet deliberate, covered the pages. It described the day Tommy disappeared in terrifying detail. He had been playing hide and seek, an innocent game, just like any child. But the tower had been waiting. And the family, the Winslows, they had been waiting too. The journals mentioned secret meetings in the dead of night, whispers of old rituals, an obsession with control and secrecy. And then entries hinted at a cover-up. Police coerced, neighbors intimidated, witnesses silenced. I turned another page. It was a list. Names, dates, locations. Every vanished child, every suspicious disappearance in Willow Creek over decades, all connected, all leading back to the tower. I felt the weight of it all pressing on me. I could almost hear the clock ticking, though the tower had been silent for years. Tick, a rhythm that matched the pulse in my veins. Then I found a photograph, faded, sepia-toned, almost unrecognizable, a group of people standing at the base of the tower, and there, in the shadows, a figure that matched the description of Tommy's last known sighting. My flashlight flickered again. A shadow moved across the far wall. I spun, heart pounding. Nothing. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it. The journal suggested there were other compartments, other rooms, other secrets, and each one seemed to build upon the last, creating a terrifying network of history and horror that spanned decades. I realized with a cold certainty that the tower itself was a guardian, not of time, but of truth, and that truth was more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. I needed to leave. I needed to process this, but something stopped me. A sound, a creak above me, not the wind, not a rat. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, and then a whisper. You should not have come back. I froze. The chest, the journals, the toys, they all seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The tower, alive, watching, judging, and I knew in that instant that the answers I sought would demand a price. I didn't know if I would leave. I didn't know if I could, but I knew one thing. The truth was waiting. And the tower, it never forgets.
What if the building you feared your entire life was waiting for you? I stepped carefully into the upper chamber of the clock tower. The stairs groaned beneath every footfall, threatening to betray my presence with each movement. The air was thick, metallic, carrying the scent of rust, old paper, and something else, something sour, almost organic. It was as if the tower itself exhaled slowly, its walls pulsing in rhythm with my heart. The chamber was massive, a hollow cavern of wood and steel, open to the bell mechanisms above. Moonlight slanted through the broken clock face, catching the dust in sharp beams, illuminating jagged patterns across the floor. Every shadow seemed alive. Every echo hinted at whispers, warnings, and I was alone, except I wasn't. I approached the center. The journals had led me here. Hints, sketches, cryptic notes, they all pointed to the very heart of the tower. The Winslow's secret had been here all along, and I was about to uncover it. I knelt beside a trapdoor embedded in the floorboards. The edges were worn, almost imperceptible beneath decades of neglect. My fingers traced the grooves. There, another symbol, like the one on the chest below. A repeated motif, a pattern of control, a mark of ownership. I pried it open. A sudden gust of cold air met me, carrying with it faint, almost imperceptible cries. I swallowed. The darkness below seemed endless. The floorboards groaned, but I couldn't stop. I had come too far. The ladder descended into the shadows. I climbed slowly, flashlight shaking in my hand. Each rung felt unstable, as if the tower itself resisted my intrusion. And then I reached the bottom. A cavernous room, concrete walls, damp and cracked. In the center, a small platform, and on it, Tommy. Not Tommy as I remembered him, but a figure frozen in time, preserved. My flashlight illuminated more than I expected. Other children, all missing children from Willow Creek over the last 50 years, encased in something, a strange glass-like resin, translucent but solid. Time had stopped for them, and they were all here. A journal lay open on a pedestal nearby, handwritten in the Winslow's patriarch's meticulous script. We are the custodians of purity. The clock stops for none. Only those who belong may remain. The tower judges, selects, and preserves. Those who vanish are not lost, they are elevated. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped back. The weight of decades of secrets pressed down on me. The whispers became clearer. The children, the tower, the family, it all intertwined. The tower didn't just watch, it chose, it decided. I stumbled toward another section of the chamber. Drawers, cabinets, and shelves lined the walls, containing records, photographs, and artifacts, names, dates, addresses, evidence of the Winslows' omnipotence over the town. Everything suppressed, hidden, meticulously cataloged. And then I found it. A ledger bound in leather, larger than any other. It listed every child who had disappeared with cryptic notations about behavior, social status, and suitability. The Winslows' obsession was chilling. They didn't just protect power, they harvested innocence. They harvested it. I heard a sound behind me, a slow, deliberate footstep. The ladder groaned, echoing through the chamber. I turned. Silhouette. Tall, impassive, the shadow of the current patriarch, still alive after all these years, standing in the doorway. "You shouldn't have come," he said, voice low, deliberate, almost intimate. "You don't understand what you're seeing." I swallowed, trembling. I had seen enough to know that I couldn't escape the truth, not yet. "What have you done to them?" I demanded, voice echoing unnaturally in the chamber. He smiled, a cold, deliberate expression. "Preserved, protected, elevated. They are no longer trapped in time, only outside it. You could join them." The air grew heavy. I felt the pulse of the tower beneath my feet, a vibration, a heartbeat. It was judging me, considering me. I realized then that the tower itself was more than wood and brick. It was an instrument of selection. It had a will, and it had patience, and it had been waiting for decades for the right witness. For me.
I ran. I don't remember the steps, only the sound of my own panicked breathing, the groan of the ladder, and the echoing footsteps behind me. The trapdoor slammed shut beneath my weight, hiding the horrors below once more. I burst through the chamber door and into the night air. The moonlight no longer felt comforting. It felt accusatory. The tower loomed, silent, massive, watching. I tried to speak, to explain, but no one would believe me. Every shred of evidence was locked away, hidden, impossible to reproduce without entering the tower again, and I knew I couldn't return. Not fully. In the days that followed, I researched. I cross-referenced the journals, the old police records, and the whispered testimonies. Every lead led back to the Winslows. Every story led back to the tower. And one pattern became clear. The town had been complicit. Everyone knew, but no one spoke. I began to notice strange things in the town. Shadows in windows where there should be none. Children who appeared too perfect, too controlled. Whispers at the edges of conversations. And always the tower in the distance. Watching. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the children suspended in their glass tombs. I heard the tower's heartbeat. The cold smile of the patriarch haunted my dreams. I tried to leave Willow Creek, but the town had a grip. Old friends, new faces, everyone carried the imprint of that fear, that obedience. I felt the shadow of the tower wherever I went. And sometimes in the deepest silence of the night, I hear it again. You should not have come. I never returned to the chamber. I never will. But the knowledge lingers. The clock tower waits. It has patience that spans generations, and its judgment is silent, deliberate, and absolute. The town remains quiet, The Winslows remain untouchable. The children remain preserved. And I know, as I speak this now, that my story is just another whisper, just another warning for anyone who dares to uncover the truth. Because some secrets are meant to watch, and some buildings are alive. And the old clock tower of Willow Creek, it will never forget.